Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Jennifer. I am Greg's wife. I am currently working on my doctorate in health science. I have 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree, and I am a certified athletic trainer. So with all of that, and then tied into my doctoral work now, everything that I have studied and learned, and especially with this program, is geared towards improving athletes, and you all are very similar to athletes. You may not have specific competitions or games or things of that nature, but you still have ACFT, you still have mandatory physical training, so all those tie in together with the needs that you put onto your body that your job requires you to meet. So this whole presentation is going to talk about the lumbo-pelvic hip complex. We're going to dive into the 3RM deadlift, and we're going to look at specifically the standing power throw. Can you please? Okay. So there's a few slides here in the front that I just kind of need to disclose as to why I'm doing what I'm doing for you, right? So my research has specifically focused on these 3 bullets. So the one up top is bolded because that's the one that we're looking at specifically today. In the spring, there's an opportunity for me to elaborate on another research point. Maybe we could do something via Zoom, since obviously we won't be here in person to do that, but I would love to continue passing on knowledge and information to you that would help you be successful in your careers and with your physical exercise demands and requirements that you have for your job. So physical performance testing, basically that covers your ACFT and anything else that is required of your job for you to be successful and basically war zone ready. Then we look at screening tools to identify movement deficiencies. Specifically with this bullet, I've investigated the single leg squat. In CrossFit terms, that's considered a pistol, right? But your single leg squat is really great at actually identifying insufficiencies, weaknesses, immobility in the lumbo-pelvic hip region. And we're going to elaborate, so I know right now you're just kind of listening to words, but I will elaborate what those all mean in just a few slides. And then the last thing is strength training programming. I would love for this information or even pieces of it for you to then go out and find or be provided actual deliberate standardized strength training program to take to your soldiers for physical training, for PT, so that they can be better and healthier and reduce their rate of injuries and musculoskeletal issues on the ACFT, out on the field, whatever they're doing for their job, hopefully help them be stronger, faster, more powerful, better at what they're doing. Okay. So the guiding principles that are driving all of the research that I've obtained and all of the information that I'm presenting to you are here. So I am trying to prevent and reduce the incidence of injury. I'm trying to prioritize evidence-based screening tools, and I'm trying to effectively communicate exercise programming for physical performance testing. Go ahead. These are really quick. And then my mission is to assist U.S. military personnel by delivering them authentic physical training programming and screening tools for improved performance and injury prevention. Next. Sadly, I don't have that memorized yet. And then my vision is to promote U.S. military personnel physical readiness through screening measures and strength training. So from all of that, do you guys have any questions as to where this is headed? Okay, great. So if you could click. All right, so these are our learning objectives. This is going to be pretty quick, right? We only have about 20, 25 minutes or so to get through the rest of this. But ideally, what I want you to get from this presentation is listed right here. So I want us to be able to understand the general anatomy of the lumbo-pelvic hip complex and how it relates to the ACFT and soldier physical training. I want us to integrate that information about the lumbo-pelvic hip complex to exercise movements used to strengthen the lumbo-pelvic hip complex for the ACFT. And then I want us to apply simple lumbo-pelvic hip screening tools for soldiers and to them so that we can help them be stronger and better with their job and with their overall health. This will help you to be ready to help your soldiers at physical training and ACFT testing. Okay? Go ahead. All right, so when we talk about the lumbo-pelvic hip complex, the next 3 slides are going to be broken down into pieces. So you're going to see up here, this is going to be the hip the knee and the ankle all together. And then from there, we're going to talk about the hip, the knee, and the ankle more specifically. So here we see all of them, at the hip, at the knee, and at the ankle. These are your major movers, right? And if you were to take those muscle groups and just put generic terms on them, we're talking about our glutes, our quads, our hamstrings, and then our calves. Okay, usually those are terms that people are pretty familiar with and understand what part of the body we're talking about. This is just showing you those muscles individually. Okay, so everything on the back side here, oh look, my hand, okay. So your biceps femoris, your semitendinosus, your semimembranosus, those are all part of your hamstring group, which is on the back. Then up there, your gluteus medius, that's on your back side here at your buttocks. Your rectus femoris, vastus lateralis over here, that's on the front, part of your quads. And then your gastroc and your soleus are part of your calf. All right, so that lumbo-pelvic hip complex is incorporating all of that musculature that we just discussed right here at the hip. So we look at the low back, we look at the hip, we look at the front of the hip with the quads and then the hamstrings. They all cross at the hip at some point. So they all count as part of that muscle group termed the lumbo-pelvic hip complex, okay? When we talk about extension at the hip, your hamstring group and your gluteus maximus are going to be on the back sides, right here at the hip, okay? Specifically for the standing power throw and for the deadlift, we need to look at triple extension, because in that standing power throw movement, it's this triple extension that's going to help you move that ball and reduce the risk of injury because of weakness at the lumbopelvic hip. When you have weakness there, muscles tend to overcompensate, and they tend to do things that they shouldn't, or try to be stronger where they're not supposed to for other muscles that are lacking, okay? And that's where we get into the screening tools that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So, triple extension uses all of that musculature at the hip, the knee, and the ankle to create powerful extension movements. It's found in everyday activities, and the ones that are listed up there, they range from anyone who maybe has had an injury, who has just had surgery, to an athlete. So if you look at the first ones, standing from sitting, that seems simple enough, but it applies to every person, especially people who are weak or have had some kind of compromise to their musculoskeletal system in that area. So even standing from sitting is something that's important to them for their body to have to do well. We just kind of take it for granted because we do it all the time, right? We sit down, we stand up. So everything else that's listed there, it all plays into those activities as well. So running, jumping, swimming, baseball pitching, basketball, and the list goes on and on. Go ahead. So now we look at extension at the knee. This is going to be done by the quadriceps group, the gastroc, and the soleus. So your calf actually comes up and it attaches across your knee on the back side, so that's why it works as an extender. So it's not just your quadriceps group in the front that extends the knee, okay? Eccentric loading here. So you can see this guy down here on the bottom. He is loaded up, and when it means to load something up, we are taking the muscles and we are lengthening them. So everybody stand up. Okay, so now, if you were to stand up on your toes, right? So everybody stand up, I'm in heels, so I'm already on my toes. I cannot be any higher. So if we stood up on our toes, that's a shortening of our calf, okay? So our calf just was shortened, and that was a concentric contraction. That's different from this. The eccentric is when we lengthen it. So now, pick a leg up, okay? And you're gonna come down in a little bit of a squat. So do you feel that pull on the back of your heel? That right there, that is an eccentric loading. And then what you would do, much like this gentleman down here, he's loading that ankle like this. Same thing that we just did, we just isolated it to one side. He's loading that ankle so that he can then fire off, right? And when we produce those eccentric loads, we get more power, okay? All right, sit down. So to read you what's up there, eccentric loading requires eccentric load magnitude in excess of the concentric prescription. So basically what that is saying is that the weight is too much for your body to overcome. So if you were ever trying to get pull-ups, right? And I know with the hanging knee tuck, a lot of people are struggling with getting a good, strong pull-up. Something that would help them to get those pull-ups would be deficit pull-ups, right? So you would hang and you would somehow get your chin up, whether you jumped or you used a band to get up there, you would then release from the band or get away from the box, and you would try to then lower yourself as slowly as you could. And that deficit, that eccentric load on your lats, that helps build strength in that muscle. So it's the same kind of thing here. We're loading it, but the weight is too much for the body to overcome. Okay, so that's what that first piece means. The elongated muscle is stretched, storing elastic energy. This method has been theorized to potentiate concentric performance through higher eccentric loading and thus higher concentric force production. So everything that we just talked about, it's just up here pretty in like super scientific terms. Okay, go ahead. All right. So now the last piece that we're looking at is that extension at the ankle. So that's our plantar flexion. And this is going to come from our gastroc and then other plantar flexors that we have back there. So this elastic energy that we just talked about storing, right? We loaded up that ankle on the back side. You load that up. That elastic energy will cause the ankle joint to launch your body into triple extension with really great force. If an athlete lands with their heel striking first, the ground reaction forces are lost and absorbed into the ground. Then the athletic potential is compromised. So you really want to try to focus on keeping that load so that you can move through movements easier with more power, okay? That's the whole point of this elastic energy being stored through eccentric loading. When we look here at this gentleman, so the previous slide had that guy all loaded up, right? He was ready to go. Now here, they've taken off. And this is just running, so it's only one leg at a time. But you can see the hip, the knee, and the ankle completely extended. And why? Because they loaded and then they pushed off and all the power went through there. Okay, so now we're in this triple extension. When we get to the standing power throw, you're gonna see that triple extension is right here up at the top. When that ball's up overhead, you're opened at the hip, the knee, and the ankle. But what do you do first? You load up, right? Okay, so go ahead. Uh-oh. Okay, so to the standing power throw. We know it's a 10-pound ball. We know the minimum for a 60-point score is 4.5 meters. And then we know that the maximum for a 100-point score is 12.5 meters. So when we look at these numbers, it's important to really focus on that transfer of power all the way from our feet up through that ball in our hands. That's the whole point. It's not going to be a movement where you can just throw the ball with just your arms overhead and be successful. You can't. It's not going to work that way. It has to come from the hips, and it has to come from everything loaded up eccentrically to fire through that movement. So you can see on the bottom, she's holding the ball, she comes down, she loads up. I don't know if I would load up that low with the ball, but she comes all the way down here. I probably would keep it more here, centered with my center of gravity, and then from here I would fire, and that ball's then gonna go up overhead much like she does there. So this replicates throwing equipment onto or over an obstacle, lifting yourself or a fellow soldier, or assisting a buddy or moving rapidly across uneven terrain. It's interesting that they take all of these movements, and on a couple slides from now, you'll see that they actually show you real-life soldiers moving people or items or themselves in a way that emulates what this actual test is showing. So it does relate to what you do. Then over here, this measures upper and lower body explosive power, flexibility, dynamic balance. Its explosive power contributes to the task requiring quick explosive movements to maneuver equipment and personnel. Is your battery dying?
No, we signed out.
Oh. Okay, next. Okay, so then here on the deadlift. So we've got our 3RM max deadlift is a strong predictor of a soldier's ability to lift and carry a casualty and to lift and move personnel and equipment. So on the deadlift down at the bottom, you can see she starts standing, reaches down, picks up the hex bar, stands at full extension, and then most importantly lowers the bar, okay, back to the ground. This 3RM deadlift represents movements required to safely and effectively lift heavy loads from the ground, jump bound, and tolerate landings. So now let's go to the next slide. Here. So what I want you to do is with all of the information so far that's been presented to you, and we're talking about just with the standing power throw and just with the 3RM deadlift, looking at those movements specifically and how they tie to the lumbopelvic hip complex and the movements that would make them stronger. I want you real quick for 1 minute to think about, write it on your phone, write it on a piece of paper, what exercises would help a soldier improve on those movements. Don't say it out loud yet, because we're going to talk. But for just a minute, I want you to think about if you were to write down as many exercises as you could think of that would help a soldier improve their scores on the ACFT, what would be the movements and exercises that they would do that you would suggest to make them stronger for those tests? Okay? Right, you're not writing anything down.
Oh, you got it.
Okay, so my question to you is, are these movements that you do? Are these movements when you work out or when you have your soldiers working out? I mean, obviously in COVID things are a bit different and we're not doing mandatory PTs anymore. But when you would have soldiers working out, are these movements that you would deliberately suggest that they use or implement or add to their programming so that they would see improvements on these tests? Are they things that you would be doing? Or are now, as you said, are you thinking of new things? Thinking of new things?
To me, I think these are things we've all been doing for our career.
Oh, okay, great. So let's kind of just go around. What do you have so far?
Something I've just recently started practicing, like I think snatches, just hitting Olympic lifts,
Okay.
to improve power.
Yep, absolutely.
Front squat, squat negatives.
Okay. Lunges, okay. I really like the lunges for our single leg squat movements. So we'll kind of get into that in a bit. That's good. What else?
Like rack pulls, hang cleans.
What's a rack pull?
It's just so like you're just working on your lower back, so you're not loading it all the way to the ground. It's just
Oh, okay.
bar.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
it's not full motion.
So you're talking like 3 positions, something like that. Okay, got it. Okay, what else?
Box jumps.
Box jumps, I like the box jumps, that's great. Plyometrics, if you're gonna do plyometrics, specifically box jumps, double unders, regular jumping, or even sprints. Sprints have a plyometric component to them because you load and then fire in that sprinting movement. Only do that twice a week, okay? Twice a week. So when you talk about plyos, you don't want to create too much wear and tear on the body, and plyos are deliberately eccentric. Anything that's eccentric, it tears the body up more because, again, like what we discussed, the load is greater than what the concentric contraction can overcome. That's the whole point. That's how you make it stronger, right? So, and how you make it stronger is you tear it apart, right? When we go to the gym, you beat yourself up. That's what you're doing. You're not getting stronger in the gym. You get stronger after the gym when you rest and when you eat well and when you recover well. That's when you get stronger. But when you go to the gym, you beat yourself up. That's what happens. Okay, so what else? Do we have any other movements?
Kettlebell swings.
Oh, I love it. Kettlebell swings. Anything else? Okay, so, excuse me, sir. Can I have you up here for a second? Because I'm not doing this in high heels. All right, so kettlebell swings. Can you grab that, please?
Oh.
They reverse this one.
Let's go that way. Thank you. We didn't rehearse this, so this might be a little rough around the edges. Can you put it down for a second? Thank you. Okay, so all of those exercises that you listed were really great. Some of the ones that I would specifically love to focus on would be things that require a powerful hip, right? So when we look at this lumbopelvic hip complex and how important it is in its role in triple extension to impart power on some of the things that you're doing in the ACFT ACFT tests, we really want to come back Okay, so this was an opportunity for soldiers during my presentation to take a moment and, from all of the information that had been presented, create a list of exercises that they would use or suggest or implement for their soldiers to do during mandatory physical training that would directly enhance or increase their scores on the ACFT. So some of the movements that they came up with were lunges, rack pulls, box jumps, kettlebell swings, squats. I think that might have been all I can remember right now, but they did a great job of listing some exercises, and then I took a couple of those and elaborated on them, but then spent the most amount of time on the kettlebell swing, and I actually brought a kettlebell from home as well. And my husband was able to demonstrate a kettlebell swing and how it directly is influenced by triple extension and how it would play a significant role in standing power throw success. After our discussion, we went back to our notes here, and you can see this image shows on the left side soldiers in action, and these images on the right side show soldiers performing evaluations and tests of the ACFT. What's in the middle are the injury concerns, what the task is, what the task measures, and what the event really kind of evaluates and looks for them to do it correctly. So you can see up here the 3-rep deadlift, lifting heavy loads off the ground. They have 5 minutes with a hex bar. They do have the ability to warm up beforehand, then they only have a certain number of attempts to actually pick the bar up 3 times successfully to count that attempt as a score. So it's important here to notice that on the 3-rep deadlift, on the standing power throw, even on the run, we're looking at potential musculoskeletal injuries that can occur during these events. And a lack of standardized exercise programming is an incredible disservice to soldiers and truly leaves them at a higher risk for injury. And if the Army is putting out information here where they're listing the injury concerns of these movements, I can't help but want to stress the importance of a good exercise program, standardized exercise program that could help prevent those injuries with proper training, as opposed to just the biannual ACFT event that is required of soldiers. With proper training and consistent execution and practice of these events, I can't help but think that the risk of injury and the incidence of injury would significantly decrease. In fact, there were 1.3 million medical encounters related to injury in 2013 that affected over 300,000 Army soldiers in that year. I think that equates to 4 brigades, which is a huge amount of soldiers that were affected with medical encounters. Of those medical encounters, musculoskeletal injuries account for 80% of all Army injuries. just musculoskeletal injuries. Of that 80% of musculoskeletal injuries, 59% were responsible for limited duty days. So now what that means is soldiers are not only injured, but then they are unable to work or unable to perform their tasks. The Army is basically having depleted numbers of soldiers ready and available for whatever the Army needs them to do, whatever that means. So how can we help prevent, reduce, even identify risk of injury for these soldiers? Pellet had found that lower body strength can directly increase force contribution to the throwing motion and play a key role in the transfer of force through the kinetic pain. So how does that happen? It happens through some screening tools like the single leg squat. The lumbopelvic hip complex plays a significant role in the overall ability of a person to do a single leg squat or a modification of it. The simplest thing that can be done for a single leg squat without even squatting is just simply picking a leg up. And if an individual or a soldier picks a leg up, you would be able to notice that their hip would drop. Okay, so the opposite hip, the contralateral hip, would drop because that gluteus medius on the standing leg is weak. That's what happens. When that gluteus medius is weak, it means that it can't fight the drop of the hip on the other side because of gravity and the weight when you pick that foot up on that other side, and it drops. That's really important, especially for the 2-mile run and for all of the ruck marches and training and running, company PT events, all of those things typically have running. And when you have running and you have weak gluteus medius, the hip is constantly being dropped right and left, and it's going to have a significant impact on that soldier's success on that event. Just like in the sprint, drag, carry, there they are standing on one leg as they sprint, as they drag, as they carry. If that hip is compromised, they're going to have a hard time with that event. So who had found that people with pain during the single leg squat had greater ipsilateral trunk lean, so trunk lean to the same side, to try to fight that dropping hip, contralateral pelvic drop, so that's where the hip drops to the other side, hip adduction, knee abduction, so that means that the hip is coming in and the knee is coming out. All of those things, that if people have pain with a single leg squat, all of those issues that are then being shown here cause problems through the kinetic pain, and then our force production as we load eccentrically or as we store energy in those loaded positions, we can't transfer power effectively because of the issues at the lumbopelvic hip complex. And the single leg squat is a great tool to help identify some of those issues. All you have to look for is either pain or a movement that would be abnormal. And this is not a means of giving you permission to be a clinician and completely diagnose someone, but it is a means for you to say, hey, I saw something that I don't know if it's normal or if it's not. Maybe you should go to the PA and have them take a look at it. Or maybe you could get a referral for PT. Or maybe we could look at, deliberate strength training programs focusing on single leg deadlifts, single leg squats, focusing on lunges, anything really that would help strengthen that gluteus medius. Those would be things now that soldier could try, especially if they didn't want to get on profile. Most soldiers don't want to do that. They don't want injuries on their record because then they can't do their job because the Army says, sometimes it says that it's too great. So oftentimes, even though those numbers are staggering for injury rates, there are so many soldiers who suffer with injuries because they don't want it on their profile. And I can speak firsthand that my husband has been one of them. So, if you look at the single leg squat, it would be a great tool, especially if we were able to put something like the functional movement screen scoring to it. It would be a really great way for NCOs and soldiers to get a better idea of just how well their soldiers can move, or maybe if they might be at risk for an injury. So the gentleman up top here, he's actually preparing to lower to a box in a single leg squat here. The higher the box is, the easier this is. So I had just talked about how the simplest thing, even without squatting here, would just be to pick up your foot and watch for that hip drop. The next thing would be to direct the person to squat. So you could have them maybe not even squat to a wall, or I'm sorry, squat to a box. You could have them squat to the wall behind them. So it would just be simply a tap of their glutes to the wall and then boom, back up. And that might be how you have to start to see if there's pain, because they might not have the strength yet to perform the motion like this gentleman is over here, the full depth, right? So you just modify it however they need to be. And you would start with something really high and then get lower and lower and lower. So here, he would be at an advanced stage where he's up on a box. But see how low his foot here is? If he was to do this on the floor, his foot would hit the floor. Now, the next step up from this would be to do single leg squat and be able to hold that leg straight out here. Either hold it with your hand or hold it above by the pure strength of your hip flexors. So there are ways to modify and scale any movement, especially a screening tool. And really you're just looking for those moments of pain or where something just doesn't quite look right. So, in conclusion, I hope that all of the information presented here was able to give you a better idea of the lumbopelvic hip complex and how it relates to the ACFT and those movements that are on there. I hope that you are able to understand exercises that would be able to have a direct impact on the lumbopelvic hip complex, and therefore any of the movements on the ACFT that would require strength, coordination, balance, power from that area of the body. And I hope that you will be able to take this information and share it with your soldiers, and hopefully, create a discussion where you can talk about maybe some of those instabilities that they may have, or some of the pain that they might be having, and suggest to them, why don't you try this strength training program? And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But if it doesn't, then they've ruled out a way to try to fix it on their own, and then they really could, with confidence, go and see someone to get the assistance that they need. The QCC listed there is for questions, comments, or concerns. And I did have some questions when I presented this to the soldiers. One was one was about how to scale exercises for brand new soldiers coming in. And I simply just reiterated the ability to modify any movement. I mean, really, it might take a little bit of creativity, but if you start and you look at what movements you're trying to improve on, and then you look at the body and what parts of the body are going to have a direct impact on those movements, look at how you can strengthen those movements, obviously with dynamic movements, since everything that we're doing on the ACFT is dynamic, right? It is very, very sport and skill specific to soldiers. But if you just look at those exercises that would have a direct impact on the lumbopelvic hip complex or any other part of the body, and how it would strengthen or make a positive impact on those ACFT tests, you can look at those exercises and decide how you would need to scale them for that soldier. So if it was a kettlebell swing, you could simply lower the weight, right? You could simply lower the range that they're swinging their kettlebell. So maybe the first kettlebell swing is only to 45 degrees from the shoulder, from the knee. So they don't do a full swing. Maybe it weighs 5 pounds. I would say I also said that it was really important to help those soldiers who are at the beginning of their Army career to not be discouraged with lower weights, lower reps, lower sets, or even, modifying movements so that they were able to increase the demands that they were putting on their body in a safe way, as opposed to just throwing weight on and trying to do something crazy out of their comfort zone, and then they end up a statistic of a musculoskeletal injury within the Army. So that was one question, and then another question was for deliberate strength training programming, and I actually suggested Wendler. I like the Wendler strength programming, so I've had success with that, and I've had athletes who have had success with that, and I've looked at a bunch of strength training programs over, I don't know, what is it, like 12 years now. So I've looked at a number of them, and Wendler seems to provide a lot of results. I should actually look and see if there's any specific research on Wendler, and how that would, affect my ability to instruct soldiers. That would be a good program for them to go to. So that was basically, that last piece was just off of my personal opinion. So I think that was it for questions and comments and concerns. They were appreciative and thankful. And then I took the opportunity to put to paper thanking Major Walgren, First Sergeant Workman, and then my husband, Captain Lentz, because they all played a significant role in my ability to get onto post and present this information to a classroom full of soldiers.